Here with reaction is Navy veteran Joe Collins, a Republican congressional candidate running to unseat Representative Maxine Waters in California's 43rd District. So, Joe, I want to work my way backwards a little bit and start with that most recent endorsement. Richard Spencer endorsing Joe Biden. I mean, no matter when Richard Spencer endorses anyone, it's a little bit bizarre. But in this case, it's kind of interesting to see how the media will even cover this, if at all, the same way that they would if it was an endorsement for President Trump. Do you think that's right?
You know what? I don't think the media will cover that. Anything to make Joe Biden look bad, the media will never cover, even though Joe Biden makes himself look bad on a regular basis. But it is no surprise that he was endorsed by somebody who was connected with the KKK. I mean, Joe Biden has been labeled a racist ever since he got into the Senate in the 1970s, and nothing has changed. You can see from his talk that absolutely nothing has changed.
And it's an interesting thing that we're having this conversation because this isn't typically the type of conversation that people are having just a couple months out from the election. It's a cliche to say that usually comes back down to the economy. In 2016, it seemed to be immigration. But now here we are talking about police reforms, but it's not even really about police reforms anymore. It's more about the unrest that we're seeing in the street, which is representative of a larger issue. It's become more about law enforcement and law and order, as they're saying. Do you think that that is something that is kind of differentiating the two parties right now, Republicans and Democrats?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can see the Democratic Party on a regular basis saying that the protests that are going on right now are peaceful protests in support of Black lives, and this notion that Black lives matter more than everybody else lives matter. And I think that's completely disingenuous. The protests are violent protests, and this is something that the Democrats have been pushing for a long time. When it comes to police reform, I think the majority of Democrats are using the police as punching bags to cover up for just, in my opinion, I would call it piss poor legislation.
And it's an interesting thing, too, because when we look at polling, it says something very different than what we see actually on the media, for example. I mean, you turn on the typical networks and you'll see almost a both sidesism, as I like to call it, kind of saying, well, this is a terrible thing, but, and then the justification for why it's okay to burn down a car dealership or something of that sort, where I don't think the average American really thinks that way. In fact, even there was a poll by Gallup that we have referenced numerous times saying that 81% of Black Americans either want the same amount of police in their communities or more police in their communities. Is there a disconnect between what the Democratic leadership is selling to the people and what the actual Democratic base wants to see from the leadership?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We already know that the leadership in the Democratic Party does not listen at all. I mean, because if they did, we would still have a lot of businesses open in the inner cities. We would still have a lot of, resources getting back to the inner cities. But just like everything else, the only thing Democrats know how to do is pander and filibuster. And this has been prevalent. It's been apparent over the last few years since our president has been in office.
And Joe, I want to talk about your race a little bit too. Is this issue important to the people that you're talking about in your community about either defunding the police, as many Democrats are calling for, or defending the police, the way that many Republicans are rebutting that slogan?
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be an issue when you talk about defunding the police. And in my opinion, I think a lot of people who want to defund the police in urban areas, that's an ignorant opinion because the crime in our areas is higher than, crime where suburbs are, where people with more affluent are. And so when people say defund the police, those people are talking about defunding the police in our area where crime is high. I wish people would say, defund criminals or let's defund gang members, but they want to defund our police, but we need police. Maybe social training to get police acclimated to the social construct of the urban communities would help, but defunding the police is not going to help.
And Joe, this is coming at a time, of course, we covered what happened in Kenosha last night. The Republican National Convention starts today. But last week, this was still a very major issue, yet it wasn't mentioned once at the Democratic National Convention. Do you think that Republicans should make a point of that this week to draw the contrast between the two parties?
You know what? I think the Republican Party should stick on message. And the message is we have to do what we can to improve the lives of the people in America. I watched the DNC, and the majority of what they did was say, vote for me because President Trump is a bad person, or they tried to vouch for their, we know Joe record, and it was really disingenuous. So the Republican Party has been doing a very good job. They need to stay on message, keep doing what they're doing to improve America.
Yeah, and I think that they're going to take your advice, to put it that way, because we've heard reports that it is going to be a more optimistic tone, that it is going to be more forward-looking, than it is necessarily going to be trying to drag someone down, much like the Democratic National Convention was. I'm sure we will see some of that, taking aim at Biden's record, things of that nature. But the message that they're putting out very early on is that they want this to be optimistic, forward-looking, and really resonate with the American people in a way that maybe the Democratic Convention didn't. But Joe Collins, I appreciate you coming on the show tonight and breaking down this issue for us. Thank you.
Thank you.